Hello and welcome to Fresh Perspectives. My name is Gail, and I do have to apologize to you, the viewing audience, because this will not air until after New Year's Day, and I should have said on my last episode, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. So I'm wishing you that on a belated, at a belated time. Okay. And anyways, the reason I'm wearing pins that look like bugs on the front of my shirt is because Bill Kuwik is my guest, and the topic we're going to be touching on today is the problems that are endangering birds, bees, and other other pollinating insects, and what people can do to help them. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks. Well, and I'm no expert on this, but I did watch a YouTube video. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. I wanted to recommend a couple of books for reading. If you guys can get your hands on some to read, it's The World According to Monsanto by Marie Monique Robin. And funny, these seem to be both written by women. And the other one is Silent Spring by a lady named Rachel Carson. Back in 1962, I believe, is the copyright date on this. 1962, and she died of breast cancer just a couple of years after the book was first published. So, and they felt that that might have had something to do with the toxins in the environment back then. So the problem that's been building up to what's been going on lately has been going on for many, many years, and probably many, many years before Rachel Carson wrote the book. She wrote Silent Spring after having received a letter in January of 1958 from a lady named Olga Owens Huckins about Mrs. Huckins' experience of small world made lifeless. She said that she was disturbed because she said she'd noticed that DDT was killing birds. And Carson's book led to the ban on DDT. So,
which is interesting, though, because we all think that it's banned. I have read things that they say that they can actually use 25% DDT in a pesticide and call it an inert ingredient. So you can actually have 25% DDT, but not the full strength that they used to use.
Well, you know, people back when I was a kid, I didn't see it around my house, but living in a small town. But I can remember. I know. I hear people now saying when they were kids in the 1950s. They would drive up and down the streets. The people that were spraying the DDT, they'd drive up and down the street in trucks that were spraying.
I don't know what they were spraying, but when I lived in Ohio, and here I have my organic farm on the corner of Campus Center Drive and Malloy Road, and I knew that they were saying that there was like mosquito problems that year, but no one had told me. I never saw anything that they were going to be spraying, and all my windows are open. It's a beautiful summer night, and there's this vehicle with this yellow light, and it's making this sound. And I'm like, what is that thing? And it goes up to one road, and it comes around the other way, and then I could taste the pesticide. I'm like, oh my God, they're fogging everything here. I had to go around and close all.
And that was when you lived in Ohio, you said?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, it would have been, I don't know, like late 80s. They were spraying for mosquitoes, I'm sure of it. Because I think that was when those triple E mosquitoes, the equine encephalitis, and I don't remember what the third E was. But they were around. So, and I know on that farm that I had, I mean, we had a bog, and I could identify 5 different types of mosquitoes around there. I mean, we had those little Asian tiger mosquitoes. There was little tiny black ones and the normal kind of bigger brown ones, but an assortment. But
yeah, we've been noticing a lot. Well, anyway, I'm going to mention first that Rachel Carson mentions in Silent Spring that for a while the pesticides were effective at killing insects, but the insects would, the ones that survive, build up a resistance.
right, they build a tolerance to the
to
pesticide.
it.
Yep.
But it was still continuing. She says that it wound up killing more birds than it did insects.
Probably.
So
I know one of the things about the bees that I watched the Paul Stamets video on, because he's doing a lot to help save the bees, and he was saying that the way that they've been trying to control, there's some kind of several bacterias and viruses that are killing bees, but there's also some type of a pest, like a tick or something like that gets on them.
Oh, probably the Varroa mites.
Right, mites.
Well,
and so they've been spraying for those things. He said, but they spray, and just like you said, they build a tolerance to it. So after a couple generations, they're tolerant to that, so they need a stronger pesticide.
Right,
But he actually found, he said, he kind of discovered this on his own. I was starting to tell you before the show that he had the garden giant, the King Stropharia mushroom that he had just planted, and he said he went out to water it because there was a dry spell, and he said he saw these bees going into the ground and taking the mycelia that was growing where he had put these mushrooms
Were
down.
these honeybees or other kinds?
They were honeybees, yeah. And he was like, he said they're taking the mushroom, and he said there was like these fine threads of the mushroom stuff, and he said these little golden drops of like dew on there. He said, and that's what the bees were collecting. And so he actually has developed. There's a little. It's almost like a little hummingbird feeder, little plastic thing that you put water and mushroom extracts into. And I mentioned earlier that they found with just reishi mushroom alone, which the Chinese have called the mushroom of immortality for a few thousand years. It's supposed to be really good for the immune system, but it is supposed to help you live longer. From what I've read, mainly because of the immune system. And they found that putting reishi mushroom extract in the bees' drinking water, their lifespan is 4 times what it normally would be. And I mentioned also that he said that the normal bee would only live for 9 days, and now because of all these colony collapse and all the other problems with bees, they're only living 4 days, not the typical 9. But that alone, just that reishi mushroom extract helped. But he made the connection too. He was saying that he thinks he was the first one to consider this, but he said that, we all grew up with Winnie the Pooh, and we know that, bears go after, honey that bees leave in hollow trees. He says, well, what else is in hollow trees but the mycelia from these different mushrooms is growing in the rotted trees, which is why the bees are there. They collect the mycelia, and apparently it's better for their health too.
Yeah, I wanted to mention, we did an entire episode earlier in the fall on just beekeeping in general. And but anyway, I wanted to mention that the reason that they only live that many days is because they're working all the time.
Right.
And so they kind of wear themselves out. But the queen keeps laying more eggs. So as long as they're not getting poisoned or anything. And but they do live all winter, though, the ones that are overwintering with the queen.
Right.
Because they're just staying inside the hive then, and they're not going out. But we were talking before we came on the program about things we've noticed in the environment that that's got us worried. Now, things that we don't see very much of anymore, but there used to be plenty of, is, for one thing, lightning bugs. I mean, it used to be your lawn was all lit up with them in the early part of the summer when the weather was first getting hot and muggy. Other things are, like another thing that I noticed this year, I hang most of my laundry outside to dry during the warmer months. And so when you do that, occasionally, not every day, but occasionally you will find bird poop on an item of clothing or something that's hanging on the clothesline. That did not happen once this year.
No.
Not once. And Carl was mentioning a whole list of different kinds of birds that he doesn't see anymore. He said something called, was it something killer? I don't know. He said he never sees any red-winged blackbirds anymore.
You know, I have red-winged blackbirds around the place, and I was going to say too about the fireflies. Not this last summer, but 2 summers ago, I had a friend from California there, and I was just like, oh my, look at, I have never seen so many. I mean, they were just everywhere, like all around my property. So I did have a lot, but then, like I said, I usually have bullfrogs, and I mean, if I wake up in the night at my house in the summertime, it's almost like deafening. There's so many bullfrogs. There's 2 creeks just to the west of my bedroom, and my neighbor has a pond just like northwest of my bedroom. Then I have a pond northeast of where my bedroom is, and I have a pond on or a creek on the other side of me, and it's sometimes deafening, the noise. And this summer, I woke up a couple times. I'm like, there's no frogs. There's no bullfrogs, and they've been, I mean, 16 years I've been there and heard that, and now I don't. And like we were saying too, you drive along the lake, it used to be there's just be so many bugs on your windshield, and now there aren't. I've read things where they say that people are out, like, you know, fishing for trout in the springtime, and they said their stomachs are empty. There's no bugs for them to eat. Birds are dying because there's no bugs to eat. And you know,
You mean there's no bugs for the fish to
for the
eat?
fish or the birds, yeah. Yeah, so a lot of the fish aren't making it either, you know. So
Yeah.
it's like one thing, you think, oh, well, bugs, I mean, what's the big deal? But
Well, you know, another thing that we haven't been seeing hardly any of, although this probably won't hurt too many people's feelings, but it's those Japanese beetles.
Well, I definitely have them myself, and I know my one friend, she's pulling them off for basil too, but I definitely had them around my place, but maybe there are less.
I mean, I'm not saying we didn't see any, but it was just an occasional one, you know. And then there's those bugs that make that noise at the end of the summer.
Yeah, cicadas.
That makes the that continuous ringing noise for a few weeks at the end of the summer. I was waiting to hear that, and it never happened.
I know they say they go through like some year cycles, but they say that, you know, you usually hear some because there's some born every year. So, you know, it's not like, you know, we have them this year and then 3 years later we'll hear them again and 2 years off. But
yeah, usually it's always been every year you could hear that noise.
And I know some things in the garden that, you know, the way things used to be. I mean, forever and ever, if I wanted to plant like say anything in the cucurbita family, like cucumbers, squash, melons, anything like that, if I waited until June 15th, or if I planted and then kept them row covered until June 15th, after June 15th, there was always less of the cucumber beetles and they do some damage to your leaves and your plants, but when they poop, they excrete bacterial wilt, and that's the real problem, because just as your plants are starting to produce a fruit, they're just going to completely die off and wilt. But Used to be I could just wait until the 15th or cover them until the 15th, 16th, then uncover them, and you wouldn't have that many. And now that's not the case. Now you can leave them covered until June 21st, and you still get decimated by cucumber beetles. But
Yeah. Yeah, I remember, it seems to me, we used to, out at our place, we have blueberry bushes and then wild berries, like blackberries and raspberries. And I've noticed that both the blueberries and the blackberries don't seem to be very sweet anymore.
well, sometimes it's funny with that because I know with me, like I had a red raspberry patch I'm going to replant, but I remember being out there and we had like a dry spell. I'm like, oh my God, these are so good, and I didn't get them all picked one day, and we had like a decent rainfall overnight. The next day, I'm like, these have no flavor at all. The extra water while they're ripe, I think, dilutes the sugars in them. And I know, if you of course know Peggy, but she one year grew cantaloupes, and I've had the same problem too. It's like you have these, it's like you're picking cantaloupes, like, oh, these are so good, they're so ripe, and then you get like an inch of rain, and then you're just like, why did I even grow these things? They taste like nothing. The extra moisture will dilute the sugar.
Moisture will
make
it so they're not sweet.
Right. I mean, we did have kind of a droughty early season, but for me, I mean, once it hit like June 11th, I think that's when I started getting like, more rainfall than I needed. For I think at least the rest of June and July. And
for the most of the year, we had, in the very early part of the summer, we had a dry spell.
Right. For me, it was the last. It was like 27th of April until June 12th. I had like a half inch of rain in that entire 7-week period.
Yeah, there was. But the whole rest of the year, I mean, the whole rest of the year, we've had more rainy days than sunny days.
Yeah, I go out to the spring where I get my water, and my friend's like, well, how does this thing work? I'm like, it's not flowing. I mean, with all the rain we had, there's the artesian spring is done. It's like there's nothing coming out of it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. One thing I was thinking, a little bit beyond just the birds, the bees. I was reading that, we're like really, because of the species that we're losing right now, basically because of pollution and climate change. They're saying we're losing 30,000 species a year.
Oh my gosh.
So there's something like 8.3 million species on the planet right now. So if in the next 100 years we lose, and they're saying it's actually accelerating. You can't just say linearly, like we lose 30,000 a year. It's actually getting worse. But even if at that means in the next 100 years, we will lose 3 million of the 8 million. So like more than a third of all species that exist right now would be extinct in the next 100 years. And again, I mean, I don't know about you, but when it comes to like spraying, I know a lot of people, they've got bees or they've got hornets, and immediately they've got to get the spray, or it's by the door. And it's like, I understand if it's by the door of your house where people come in and stuff, but I don't even know what they are, the huge hornets had made a nest just inside of my garage door in my garage. And I was like, I mean, and I always I'd let my dogs out, and I'd go and put my hands on the garage door like this. I'm like, oh, that nest is like right over there. Never got stung once, and I thought, well, I actually have some spray, and I got some years ago because I had a nest in the same place. I never got bit. A friend of mine came over. I had a 5-gallon of hydraulic fluid for him, and I said, oh, hey, listen, why don't you take this? And I was right underneath the nest, picked it up, took it outside the garage, set it down for him. He walked over and picked it up, and he got stung. So
oh, God.
Like, all right, I guess I'll get the stuff. So I got the spray, and I wait for a cool morning, and a couple days later, I'm like, they're gone. I did nothing. I didn't spray them, never did. And the same thing with those giant hornets this year. Never sprayed them, and they're gone.
Yeah, well, another thing that Carl was mentioning to me, and I think I've probably noticed it myself actually, is he thinks that the toads are not living long enough to get full grown.
Yeah.
He says he doesn't see the full-sized ones anymore. So, and you only see small amounts of any of them, you know, even the little ones. You don't see very many of them.
Right, right, yeah. I can't remember the last time I saw them. I used to see them in my garden all the time. But snakes, it seems like there's plenty of. Probably a place I've seen.
There was a couple of years there where it didn't seem like there were any around by our house, but now the snakes seem to be making a comeback. Usually during the warmer months, we'll have there'll be some snakes take up residence in our compost bin, so they seem to like that. Now, in the World According to Monsanto, by Marie Monique Robin, I guess the idea for pesticides originally came from the mustard gas that was being used in one of the wars.
World War One, yeah.
World War One. And I think that's sort of where they got the idea. I think they even got the idea from that for chemotherapy drugs too, for cancer patients.
Well, I know that the whole idea for our chemical fertilizers came from World War One because they were trying to figure out a wartime use for gunpowder, and you know that all you need to do is put an accelerant to high nitrogen fertilizer, and you've got a bomb. Basically, that's what Timothy McVeigh did. And,
is that what he used?
Yeah, he used. I believe he had 55-gallon drums of high nitrogen fertilizer, and I guess an accelerant like I don't know, kerosene or something like that. I certainly don't have the recipe for it myself, but that's all you really need to do to make it. And so, a lot of people will say, oh, conspiracy theories, blah, blah, blah. But like Elliot Coleman told us, he said, I thought the same thing when I first heard it. But he said if you go back to the early 1920s, USDA handbooks. He said they were proud of the fact that they came up with the idea, like, hey, yeah, now we have all this gunpowder on hand if we ever need it, but we're just making fertilizer here. That's all we're doing. So that's where chemical fertilizers came from, because before that, everybody used plant-based fertilizers, composts, and animal-based stuff too. So. It doesn't necessarily, you don't necessarily need the chemical fertilizers, and a lot of times we know that actually will ruin the soil. I mean, if you use it for too many years, it actually depletes the minerals from the soil, and it just causes an imbalance. So, the first year you use it, you see huge gains, like huge results, big yields, but there's diminishing returns after that.
Mm-hmm. Well, Roundup is a big thing right now, and apparently one of the toxins in it, glyphosate, I think it's called,
glyphosate,
is one of the ingredients that was in Agent Orange during the Vietnam War.
I don't know about that.
According to what I've heard.
I'm not sure about that. I know that Agent Orange was a defoliant, and I know that at one point a few years ago there was some dream bill that they were asking, they wanted to use Agent Orange in some, around the household, herbicide kind of sprays, but I thought it got blocked. I didn't think that they did that.
I certainly hope so. That damaged from the Vietnam veterans. It damaged a lot of people's lives.
I've seen clients that were there that they were in areas where it was being used, and this one guy from Westville, he just had all these bags attached to his body just to release fluids and stuff.
Oh, gosh.
And he says, he goes to the VA hospital, and he says there's all these guys sitting there with all the same problems.
Mm-hmm. Well, anyway, technically, if people are going to use, even if somebody is going to use it, and I want to discourage people from using it, but Yeah, it's a weed killer. But technically, if a person, people who do it in certain lines of work, use it in certain lines of work, apparently you're supposed to literally wear a hazmat suit if you're using Roundup. And yet you see people all over the place in their short sleeve T-shirts and shorts.
Well, I think in some cases, I mean, I've actually gone to the Cornell Cooperative Extensions Laboratory for berry grower webinars, and there was a guy from, I think, Rutgers. He was supposed to be like, world expert on raspberries, and he specifically said, if you're going to be using glyphosate near your raspberries, he says, you really need to be like super, super careful with this. He said, because the thing is, he said, if you spray the weeds just as the flowers are starting to form, he said, those weeds die. They get broken down by the microbes in the soil, and then the nutrients from those weeds get uptaken into your raspberry plant. And he says you will have the herbicide will be in the berries that you're growing.
Yes.
And he said, you have to be careful. Protect your family, protect your workers, protect your people are coming out there to do their pick your own sort of a thing. And here this was the world expert, and he's telling us how to be super, super careful with this. And I won't say who it was, but someone who has a farm in the Fredonia area says to me after the thing's over, he's like, I don't get why all you organic people have such a problem with glyphosate. And I'm kind of like, did you just listen to what he just said? And here he is, a farmer at a farming webinar, growers webinar, and the person who was doing the speaking specifically warned you about using that sort of stuff. And I just kind of figured myself I would probably never pick at his farm either. But
you get situations where stuff spreads from the non-organic places, the toxins and things.
Well, and even like I don't know. I thought it was a fairly famous story. There was the one guy that was growing canola oil seed up in Canada. It was all organic. It had been for several generations. They'd done it organically. Monsanto came in and said, "Hey, we've got this Roundup Ready, canola seed," and he's like, "Well, we've got an heirloom organic variety we've been growing for years here, so really not interested." And all of his neighbors bought it up. They all bought the other stuff. Well, first of all, the pollen could drift over and cross with his, but one of the farmers admitted, he said, the one time after we picked, he says, he was driving down the road next to this guy's farm, and they have the sort of the tarp over the top of the big harvest dump truck, and he said, he should have stopped and tied the thing down, but he said that thing was flapping, and he said the seed was just flowing out of the back of his truck and blowing into this other guy's field. And the other guy said, I use a little bit of Roundup like on the edges, like off of my fields by the road. And he said, I just started noticing. He said, this stuff, he said the Roundup wasn't killing the canola. And he figured, man, did I develop kind of a resistant strain? But that's what Roundup Ready canola is. It's like you can spray it and it won't kill it, but it'll kill everything else around it. And then Monsanto secretly, because he wouldn't buy it, Monsanto seed, but Monsanto secretly bought like a 50-pound bag of his seed, tested it genetically, and they found that their genetics were in his field, and they tried to sue him because he was growing their patented crop without buying it. And he's like, well, he says, that's the thing. He says, I never did buy it. He says, your stuff infiltrated my field. So it was one of those rare cases where he actually won the case against Monsanto because he was able to prove, I think it cost him years of income, but he actually did beat the big guy at their own game and won because they really destroyed what he was doing with their Roundup Ready stuff. And it's funny too, like I go, I want to buy soybeans, and I don't necessarily always order from a distance to have them shipped, because sometimes the shipping costs me more for the 50-pound bag of soybeans than the soybeans themselves. But I go to a local place and they're always trying to push the Roundup Ready on me. I'm like, hey, no, and that's because it's more expensive to get the Roundup Ready. Like a 50-pound bag might be $50.
They
but
want
the
you to spend more money.
Right, the Roundup Ready is $30 more for the same bag that would be $50. It's $80 for the Roundup Ready. I was like, can I get it? They have to order it to get the non-Roundup Ready.
Yeah, I guess, like, they grow a lot of cotton in India, I think.
Right.
And I have heard that they, because of the fact that Monsanto sold so many Roundup Ready cotton seeds to farmers over there, that, well, anyway, it seems like it starts out kind of good, but then it kind of, well, what it is I guess you can't save seeds and then plant again the next year.
Well, I know that was the big thing.
That because the ones that you save from your crops are not gonna,
they've got that Terminator gene in them. Yeah, they won't. They'll make it that it's sterile. That they won't. You can't do that because then they make more money, and they made it illegal for you to save your seeds. Which a lot of farmers in this country, there used to be, I can't remember what they called them, but there was actual machines that they would go to the farm, and you grew 1,000 acres of corn. Well, they would take one small part of that and they would run it through the machine, and then like these are your seed for next year. Can't do that with Monsanto. You have to buy fresh every year. You can't use your own seed. There was a contract out for this guy that was going, and he was actually going from farm to farm. They said there used to be like 15 of his machines in the state he was in. He said now he's like the last one, and he said everybody's telling him that Monsanto's got me on the list. They're looking for him, and they're going to have him charged because they're losing profit over it. But well, I mean, you say, well, that's business, but I've read stories where in Africa where they have like different tribes have come together for a couple thousand years, and they trade seeds. It's like, oh, well, you have that seed. Well, this is an old family seed, and we trade. Well, Monsanto got in there, and they went and they traded seeds with some of these farmers from Africa. Well, Monsanto goes back and they genetically alter those seeds, so now they can be considered their genetic property. They own it now that they've genetically altered it. So they go back to Africa and tell them, well, now you have to pay us royalties on that. And they're like, what do you mean? We gave it to you last year. Yeah, well, now we own it, so now you have to pay us royalties on the seeds that your family's been growing for 1,000 years. That's how they do it. But
yeah, at some point in time, and this is supposed to be the cause of colony collapse disorder, I guess, is the neonicotinoids that were supposed to be supposedly less toxic to humans. Of course, I think even a little bit of toxicity is too much from my point of view. But it turned out to be worse for the bees. So I remember Carl and I had honeybees for almost 30 years.
Oh, really?
And, well, anyways, I remember this one summer, I think it might have been in August or something like that. We had checked on our bees, and the hives were all strong at one point. And 2 weeks later, we went out and checked the beehives again. And I swear to you, this one hive, there was not a single bee. This was before it came out in the news about colony collapse disorder. There was not a single bee in that. I mean, there were not dead bees laying in the hive. There was just no bees in there. It was completely empty. Well, at that point in time, we had been attending monthly Beekeepers Association meetings. And so we brought up the subject, and we're going, usually, if you have your bees swarm, it's part of the hive that leaves, not
Right.
the entire hive. And we were saying, is it possible that the entire hive would have swarmed?
Mm-hmm.
And they were all puzzled because, like I said, nothing had been in the news or anything yet, and they were all puzzled. They didn't know. They said bees are unpredictable, but none of them had ever experienced that before. And then about maybe a month or so later, we start finding out that it starts coming out in the news that other people who we just had a few hives, but other people were in it to earn their living.
Right.
And it was just heartbreaking for them. They go out and find that there literally were no bees in some of their hives. So anyways, it has a lot to do with toxic substances for the birds,
Well,
too.
and the thing is too, I think people sometimes think differently too. I know my one friend, I can't remember what chemical he was using. I'm like, really? You're going to use that around here? Like, oh, come on. He says, what I use is just like a drop in the bucket compared to Monsanto or, Dow Chemical or something like that. I'm like, yeah, but I mean, if you think of like your house is one drop, then your neighbor's is a drop, and that neighbor's a drop. By the time you get to the end of your block, you got a half a bucket full. It's like, it does add up. And from the stuff I've read, they see a lot of people, oh, these big farmers, the stuff they spray. But they say the big farmers are measuring everything exactly, so they're putting just the right amount on. They don't want to put more money into it if they don't have to. Whereas somebody at home is like, well, if a cup is good, I'll put 2 or 3 cups in. They go extra strong with it, and they're actually using more than a farmer would use just around the house, because you have the whole big bag of the stuff. You may as well use it, right? And so it goes overboard. But
well, in Silent Spring, one of the stories in there was about a certain dairy farm where in that area that this dairy farm was, they were going to be spraying for gypsy moths. And this one farmer insisted, on not having her property sprayed because they had dairy cattle, and but the people in the airplanes that were doing the spraying, they went and sprayed the person's property anyway. But samples were taken of the cow's milk, and there were certain quantities of the spraying that was done, the spray that was used for the gypsy moths in the cow's milk. So, I mean, basically, if you're drinking cow's milk, you could be drinking toxic pesticides.
Well, I know the one film, I think they showed it at the vegetarian meeting the one time. The one guy was, he was a beef farmer, though, I think. And
Howard Lyman. Yeah, Howard Lyman. He wrote the book, The Mad Cowboy.
Oh, I don't know.
His brother died of leukemia from toxins
Right,
used
and then he ended up with the tumor in his spine,
in
right?
his spine, and almost lost his ability to walk.
Right.
And after that,
He switched over.
He switched over to a totally plant-based diet.
Well, I know they said that he said there would be so many flies out when the cows would come in to eat. He said you could walk outside and reach into the flies and just grab like a handful of flies.
Oh, yeah.
So he said while the cows were eating, they would fog with like a pesticide, so it would kill the flies that were all around the cows. So the pesticide was literally going into their food, and they were breathing it while they were eating it.
Yeah, apparently the meat supply is pretty contaminated with toxic substances. So, another thing, a lot of people have told me that they did not see any a lot of people have told me they didn't see any bees this year. We did see a swarm of bees this year, but of honeybees, that is. I'm assuming the people, of course, a lot of these people that were telling me this are people that don't live out in the country, you know, so they're probably living where there's a lot of houses and people are doing a lot of spraying.
Funny, when I lived in Forestville, I planted just a cover crop of buckwheat, and I remember one time just standing there, and there's all these buckwheat flowers. I'm just like, there isn't one bee in any of this. And I'm like, maybe I'm just not seeing it. Like, wait, I just saw a fly. If I can see a fly, that would be seeing the bees. But then I was thinking, you know, geez, I didn't see any bees on that whole patch of that stuff the whole season. But then,
and it'll be covered with them if there's if there's a hive nearby. I mean, they'll just be all over the buckwheat.
Well, but I read that there's a type of, I want to say Japanese buckwheat that the bees just don't go to. And I'm thinking, well, maybe that was it, because I mean, there was just like nothing. I mean, not even a single bee going to it. But so, you know, sometimes it's kind of hard to tell, like, but you know, sometimes too, I mean, I've been under a fruit tree that's in flower, and you just hear the buzzing, and it's like, man, they're all over the place. But then sometimes I've been under a fruit tree where you're like, there's all these open flowers and it smells really sweet here, but there isn't a single bee around.
Well, there's a province in China where they have to hand pollinate their fruit trees because when Chairman Mao was in power, there was a certain kind of bird that he didn't like, so he ordered to have them all shot. So after there weren't any more of those birds, then all of a sudden there was an overpopulation of insects. So they used pesticides and to kill off the bugs, which of course included the pollinating insects, and now they have to hand pollinate their fruit trees there.
Now, when I worked in the tomato houses up in Vermont, everybody else would take lunch at noon, but I was the bee. So 5,000 tomato plants, and I had two wands. One of them was just continuously like vibrating, had this like little rubber tip on it, and so every fruit truss where there was flowers on it, and it was always best in the middle of a warm sunny day. So at noon I would be going through bzz, 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 and you know, you think, oh, 5,000. It's like, well, sometimes there's 2 and 3 fruit trusses per plant. So I mean, it could have been up to 15,000 fruit trusses a day. And we didn't do it every day, but if that thing just hit that stem and just vibrated, you would just see the pollen release from the tomato flowers. So they, you know, but then again, that's indoors. You can't really trust that. I mean, you wouldn't bring a beehive into a greenhouse to pollinate.
No, you wouldn't, because, well, anyways, there was one thing that I saw one time about a man who prefers the Africanized honeybees, and of course those are the ones known as killer bees.
Right, more aggressive.
Because they're extremely aggressive, but they also are resistant to bee diseases and things. Like the varroa mites were brought up from down south to our area.
Right, and now we don't have cold winters, and that's the same thing with ticks, I think. You know, if we were to get cold like we used to, then
that's
we would...
what it is the ticks have been, that's why there's been an increasing problem with ticks.
And you know, the funny thing is, people for the last several years, oh, the tick problem. I'm like, I'm outside almost all day, every day. My dogs are out there with me, no ticks. Well, in the end of October and November, it was like in about a 3-week period, I pulled 7 ticks off of my 2 dogs, and the one dog must have had Lyme disease for some time, but I know it was it would have been like the Sunday before Thanksgiving. She was hardly walking. She would hardly move that day at all. I'm like, something isn't right with her. And my friend was coming over that day. When he comes over, she's going to jump up and she'll run out there. And she was on her dog bed by the glass front door and moving her legs and yipping, but she couldn't stand up. And got her to the vet the next day. The antibiotics cleared it right up, like right now. But yeah, she had symptoms way back on Memorial Day weekend, I remember.
Yeah, I've heard that the ticks do their feeding usually in the spring and the fall.
Well, that makes sense because that's
So,
when I saw. I only had one on the male dog back in April, and she must have got one, but I didn't see it. I mean, she's black; it's kind of hard to see it on the white dog. You can see it fairly easily, but sometimes I see one on him, and then I'm like, wait a minute, where's that thing? And then I go to look for it. I'm thinking, with her being really dark, it would be really hard to see a little black speck or gray speck on her. But
now, we need to talk a little bit. We've got a little under 12 minutes left. We need to talk about what people can do to help the birds and the bees.
well, I mean, just like we're saying, just don't use the pesticides and
And the weed killers.
stuff. Well, herbicides too. Yeah, around your own houses if you can help that. And then, like I've said a couple times already, that bee feeder thing would be good. Also, I don't know, really necessarily so much about feeding birds if that's the answer. It seems to me that we need the bugs to feed the birds, and we don't have the bugs. So, and I think the bugs problem, the lack of bugs problem, is because there's so many. Well, I think it's just pollution in general, but just all of the pesticides that are being used in general.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've said it for years. I mean, buy organic. I mean, if you buy organic food, it encourages more organic food to be grown. So there's less chemicals being used, less pesticides being used. But I know some of the bigger farmers around me that use them. But I know people were complaining about using them. That they found out that they were using Roundup on the Fredonia State campus. It's like, well, these farmers down the road from me have hundreds of acres that they're spraying, and we're just up from the Canadaway Creek. So where do you think that goes? I mean, it just ends up in the ditch. And well, and I'm sure I mentioned this on a previous show. Like for me, it's like the one neighbor, non-farmer, he used to spray his ditch and underneath his fence line with Roundup,
Right.
and that ditch drains downhill towards my property, goes into my creek, and my one dog, who had never had any health problems at all, within a year of moving in there, he ended up with lymphatic cancer. I look up in something, where does lymphatic cancer come from the dogs? Lawn chemicals. And I don't use any lawn chemicals, so he ended up getting a type of cancer from a secondary source. It was someone up the road from me. So
I guess people, unless they watch this program or something, they're just not thinking that the things they're using
And I
are.
don't think a lot of people think like, oh, Roundup, yeah, it's a weed killer or whatever. I one time my ex-landlord sprayed, and I didn't know he had sprayed. And my dog went out and was eating some grass from around the tree and from next to the house, and then she was so sick for a couple days after that. And then I noticed, like, why are all those weeds turning brown? I'm like, he must have sprayed Roundup here and never even told me. And next time I saw him, I said, if you're going to be spraying, dangerous chemicals like pesticides and herbicides around the house, I said, you need to let me know. I said, my dog ate that stuff. Oh, no, there's no herbicide. He said, just a little Roundup, he told me.
Just a little Roundup.
Yeah, well,
But it's highly toxic. I know some people are convinced that the reason they have cancer is because they used it.
Well, and just, I don't know, we probably have mentioned this on a previous show, a client of mine, she's a nurse in Akron, Ohio, and she had lived in Chautauqua County previously, but she moved away, was coming back, married some guy who actually did have some acreage of grapes, and before she left Ohio, she contacted her health insurance. She's like, well, I just wanted to make sure that my insurance is still going to cover me when I moved to New York. They're like, yeah, you're all set. You're all set. And I think her monthly was like $200. It was $800 when she came here. And she called them up. She's like, what? You guys said I was covered. And they're like, well, yeah, you're covered, but they had to charge her 4 times more because they said that the cancer rate here is so much higher, and the insurance company literally said because of all the grape sprays. But I know you'll hear arguments from anybody that grows grapes that they don't use the sprays, and those sprays aren't dangerous like the old ones were, but still we have a huge high rate of cancer around here, and the insurance companies know they have to charge more because people are going to get cancer because of all the grape spray. But
So
yeah, I mean, if you could just reduce what you use at home, and then again, if you eat foods that are produced organically, then there should be less of those things being produced over time. And so try to do that, and again, try not to just immediately go for the spray for the bees or whatever that's around your place. I mean, if you can let them live, that's not a bad thing. And like I said, for me, and this even goes within the garden, and I saw it up in Vermont. Like I said, I'm working in like a sort of a larger greenhouse thing. I mean, the guy had 6 greenhouses full of tomatoes, and I remember that there was this one section of plants, about 15 plants, that were getting this black sticky stuff on them. There was some kind of bug. The tomatoes would actually have this black kind of sticky kind of stuff on them. And I brought it to the attention of the farm owner, and he came out and looked at it, and he's like, well, he said, keep an eye on it, see if it spreads. He says, we're already in October here anyway. He said, what up here, he said, it's going to get so cold in the wintertime, we don't usually have to worry about anything like that. He says, but it's 15 plants in a greenhouse that has 1,500 plants, so it's 1% of one house. So it really wasn't, a huge big deal to them. But he said just keep an eye on it, and we'll see what happens. But you don't, and sometimes things will just go away. I mean, I've seen where it's like, oh, well, I have this pest problem, and I think I need to do something. And in most years, I would go and I would use something like or organic, bug control of some kind. And then some years it's like, oh, I don't have the stuff. I'd have to go to the store and get it, or try to order it or something like that. And 3 days go by and they're gone anyway. It's like normally I would spray and think like, oh, I did that, I helped them. But then when I do nothing, they go away anyway. So I think that's one of the things people need to realize is that if you just don't panic and wait it out, a lot of times you don't have a problem. But I had a client, he was growing some strawberries at his place, and I can't remember what it was. It was like a little bit of like brown edges to the leaves or something like that. And I looked it up. I said, well, it says here that this is just like it's just a visual thing on the leaves. It doesn't affect the crop. Shouldn't have any problem, blah, blah, blah. Well, he went to some place that sold, some kind of fungicide or something like that. And you're like, well, they told me. And they're like, and you end up spraying fungicide on your organic strawberries. And now you have fungicide. It's like, well, it says right here that all that you're seeing, that little brown, is just an aesthetic thing to the leaf. It has nothing to do with the strawberry itself. But, people think that everything, the leaf has to look perfect. Everything has to look perfect for you to get, the right nutrient from it. And that's...
Yeah, I've heard that, like, when you go to the store, or when you go someplace to buy fruits and vegetables, the ones that are labeled as organically grown won't look as good as the ones...
Sometimes.
As the ones... Yeah, so people will kind of judge by the appearance, even though it might be safer to eat.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess to me though, too. I mean, I guess I always think of like, to me, like when you're growing organically, like for market and stuff like that, like the stuff that we grew on the farm up in Vermont. I mean, everything looked perfect because it was picked at the right time and all. But sometimes, but we're not gassing the tomatoes either. We're picking tomatoes that are like vine ripe. We're not. I've worked in the industry where you pick the tomatoes when they turn white. If there's a little bit of pink on them, it's too far gone. So they pick them when they're just turning white, so they can put them in a chamber with heat and ethylene gas, so the outside of the tomato turns red, so it looks like a ripe tomato. But you've seen those things you buy in the store. You cut it open and it's white on the inside. It's not even. Close to ripe.
And they don't have very much flavor.
No
either.
flavor at all, because it's not a ripe tomato. It's a green tomato that has a red skin, basically. And I know Elliot Coleman said, people are getting tired of spending money on different colored cellulose because it all tastes the same, because it's not ripe. And same thing with like a bell pepper. A green pepper should have another color. It should be red or yellow or orange or purple. But if you pick it green, I mean, it'll keep for probably 2 months if you keep it refrigerated.
Yeah, I've noticed, this is kind of funny, I've noticed in the grocery store the green bell peppers are usually cost less than the ones that are red or orange.
It takes almost 30 more days
something.
for them to ripen, so they got to keep them 30 more days on the plant to get them to turn color.
Yeah, so that's why the price is lower on the green ones.
Yeah.
And then people can plant flowers and things.
Right.
Too,
Flowers for the bees, and just like don't cut your grass as often. They say, like in May, just like leave the dandelions. And I know myself, like I have I don't know, it's probably 4 or 5 acre field or something like that, and I go out and look, and I'm like, I was going to brush hog the field, but I see like it's not necessarily mostly bees, but I'm like, there's praying mantis, there's grasshoppers, there's all these other bugs out there. I'm like, well, this stuff is 30 inches deep. I'm thinking, if I go through that and mow that all down, I'm basically destroying this entire ecosystem for all these bugs. So I'll wait until the weather gets really cold, so there isn't any bugs on them. You can still brush hog after they're gone.
Yeah. And then there's also, as far as the birds are concerned, I guess, if wind turbines get put in Lake Erie, that'll kill a lot of the migrating birds as they come through. Also,
I saw American bald eagle when I was getting on the thruway earlier this week in Dunkirk.
Oh yeah.
I don't see them all over.
There's a section of woods, not a lot of acreage of woods, but between where the roads go between Hartfield and Mayville, where there's wooded areas.
Okay.
There's quite a population of bald eagles in through there.
I know people see them on the lake and stuff all the time. I've seen a few. October of 2018, I saw one in my yard three different times. I thought maybe they'd possibly start nesting there, but I never saw them again.
Yeah, that would have been nice. Well, I hate to say it, we could have talked about the helping the birds and the bees all day, but we've come to the end of another episode of Fresh Perspectives, and I want to wish you, Bill, and the viewing audience a Happy New Year.
Thank you.
You're welcome.